Andrew Carnegie, the mentor of the man who taught millions, Napoleon Hill. Most people know Napoleon Hill. They've read Think and Grow Rich. They've memorized the 13 Principles. They quote his philosophies. They can recite his ideas about definiteness of purpose, the mastermind principle, and the power of the subconscious mind. But almost nobody knows the man who shaped Hill's mind. The man Hill spent 20 years studying. The man who gave Hill access to power, wealth, and wisdom that built America's greatest fortunes. And here's what makes this uncomfortable. Napoleon Hill wasn't the master. He was the student. He documented brilliance. He didn't create it. He observed empire building. He didn't build the empire. And the difference between what Hill wrote and what Carnegie actually taught reveals why some people build empires while others just consume motivational quotes. There's a teaching Carnegie gave Hill that never made it fully into the books. Not because Hill didn't understand it, but because he knew most people couldn't handle it. He knew it was too harsh, too demanding, too uncomfortable for mass consumption, so he softened it. He wrapped it in gentler language. He made it digestible. He made it inspirational instead of operational, and in doing so, he made it less effective. What I'm about to show you is the raw version. The version Carnegie used to build the largest steel empire in history. The version he used to choose which men would become millionaires and which would stay employees. The version that separates builders from observers. If you want content that doesn't repeat what's everywhere else, subscribe now. Because this channel doesn't speak the obvious, let me tell you what I see in the comments every single day. Disciplined people. People who read. People who study. People who watch videos, take notes, apply principles. And they're still stuck. Not because they're lazy, not because they lack information, but because something isn't clicking. They have the habits, they have the mindset, they have the discipline, but they're still not building, and the frustration is real. One person commented, "I've been doing small habits for 2 years and I'm still in the same place." Another said, "Discipline without results feels like punishment." Another wrote, "At what point does mindset actually turn into money?" These are real questions from real people who are doing everything the books tell them to do, and it's not working. Because the error isn't in the effort. The error is in the order. Most people are starting at step 5 when they should be starting at step 1. They're trying to build habits before they've established identity. They're trying to execute before they've decided. They're trying to become before they've chosen to be. And that reversal, that fundamental misunderstanding of sequence, is why most people stay stuck no matter how hard they work. Here's what most people don't know about Andrew Carnegie. When Napoleon Hill met him in 1908, Carnegie wasn't looking for students. He wasn't looking for followers. He wasn't trying to teach the masses. He was 73 years old. He'd already sold his steel company for $480 million. He'd already become the richest man in the world. He'd already proven every principle of wealth building that existed. And he was done. He was transitioning into philanthropy. He was building libraries. He was funding education. He was giving away his fortune. But he had one final project, one last contribution. He wanted to document the science of success, not write it himself, but commission someone to study it, to interview the most successful people in America, to find the patterns, to create a philosophy that anyone could learn. And he needed the right person for that assignment. Not someone brilliant. Brilliance was common among educated people, not someone connected. Connections could be made, not someone wealthy. Wealth would create bias. He needed someone with a specific quality. The ability to observe without ego. The ability to ask questions without assuming he already had the answers. The humility to spend decades learning before teaching. The patience to absorb wisdom from hundreds of people without rushing to conclusions. And when Hill walked into his office for an interview that was supposed to last 15 minutes, Carnegie saw that quality. Hill was 25 years old, a journalist from a small magazine, ambitious but broke, talented but unproven. And Carnegie tested him immediately, not with questions about his credentials, but with questions about his character. How do you handle failure? How do you respond to criticism? What do you do when everyone around you doubts you? How long are you willing to work on something before you see results? And Hill's answers revealed something Carnegie was looking for, not certainty, not confidence, not even competence, but the willingness to commit to something bigger than himself without needing immediate reward. So Carnegie made him an offer. "I'll give you access to the most successful men in America: Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, Theodore Roosevelt, William Taft, Alexander Graham Bell, George Eastman, F.W. Woolworth. I'll open doors you could never open yourself. I'll make introductions that would take you a lifetime to earn. And in exchange, you'll spend the next 20 years interviewing these men, studying how they think, documenting their patterns, finding the principles that make success predictable instead of accidental, and you won't charge anyone for it. You'll do it for free. You'll support yourself however you can. But this work, this research, this contribution to humanity, you'll do it without payment. Because understanding how wealth is created is worth more than any salary. And here's the part most people don't know. Carnegie didn't just give Hill a list of names and send him away. He trained him first. For months, Carnegie met with Hill regularly, teaching him how to ask questions, how to listen, how to observe patterns instead of collecting stories, how to think like someone who builds instead of someone who reports. And during those months, Carnegie shared something with Hill that never made it fully into Think and Grow Rich. A framework for how he actually made decisions, how he chose which opportunities to pursue and which to abandon, how he determined which men to trust and which to remove, how he built an empire while others built businesses. And that framework was built on one central idea. Identity comes before proof. You don't wait to become someone. You decide you are someone, and then you act from that identity until reality has no choice but to agree. Carnegie didn't build a steel empire and then call himself an industrialist. He decided he was an industrialist when he had nothing, and then he built until the world confirmed what he'd already decided internally. That's not motivation. That's mechanics. That's the actual sequence of how transformation happens. Decision first, action second, proof third, not the other way around. Hill absorbed this teaching. You can see it throughout Think and Grow Rich. He writes about definiteness of purpose, about making a decision and burning all bridges behind you, about the power of autosuggestion to transform your self-image. But he presented it as inspirational philosophy. Carnegie lived it as operational reality. He didn't theorize about commitment. He made billion-dollar commitments with incomplete information and no backup plan. He didn't write about self-image. He decided who he was and then defended that decision against every circumstance that contradicted it. He didn't teach visualization. He taught irreversible decision-making that left no room for retreat. For 20 years, Hill traveled across America, interviewing the most successful people of his generation, and what he discovered became one of the most important books ever written. Think and Grow Rich has sold over 100 million copies. It's been translated into dozens of languages. It's created billions of dollars in wealth. It's changed millions of lives, and that contribution is extraordinary. Hill took the complexity of empire building and made it accessible to anyone willing to study it. He took the wisdom of titans and distilled it into principles average people could apply. That's a gift to humanity that cannot be overstated. But here's what Hill couldn't fully translate: the weight of what Carnegie actually taught, the absolute nature of the commitment required, the totality of the responsibility demanded. Because Carnegie didn't teach success as something you pursue. He taught it as something you become through irreversible decisions that eliminate every option except moving forward. And that level of commitment, that degree of finality, that acceptance of total responsibility without any safety net, is something most people will reject. Even when they hear it, even when they understand it, they'll reject it because it's too uncomfortable, too risky, too absolute. If you're realizing this goes way beyond motivation, subscribe now, because from here forward, the level rises. What I'm about to share isn't feel-good content. It's the difference between people who talk about building and people who actually build. Let me connect this directly to the patterns I see in comments. Someone wrote, "Do small habits really work, or is it just another productivity myth?" Here's the answer Carnegie would give. Habits work, but only after you've established the identity that makes those habits inevitable. Most people try to build habits to become someone. They think if they do the right things long enough, they'll transform into the person they want to be. But that's backwards. Carnegie taught the opposite. Decide who you are first. Make that decision final and irreversible. And then the habits aren't something you force yourself to do. They're something you can't avoid doing, because they're expressions of identity, not tools for transformation. Think about it this way. If you're trying to build the habit of waking up early, and your identity is, "I'm someone who's trying to become disciplined," you'll fail because your identity allows for failure. Trying means it might not work. Trying means you're experimenting. Trying means you haven't fully committed. But if you decide, I am a builder, and builders start their day before everyone else is awake, then waking up early isn't a habit you're building. It's a behavior that flows automatically from who you've decided you are. You're not trying to wake up early. You're being consistent with your identity. And identity is far more powerful than willpower. Another comment said, discipline without action is just illusion. Exactly right. But here's the deeper issue most people miss. They think action comes from discipline. They think if they just develop enough self-control, they'll be able to do hard things consistently. But Carnegie taught that action comes from decision. Irreversible decision. The kind of decision where there's no backup plan, no exit strategy, no safety net. You decide you're a builder. You burn every bridge back to your old identity. And then every action flows from that decision. Not because you're disciplined, but because you've made retreat impossible. When there's no option to go back, the only direction is forward, and that creates action far more reliably than discipline ever could. Another person asked, is success about identity or effort? And this is the question that divides everyone watching this video right now. Hill would say both. You need the right mindset and you need to work hard, and that's true. But Carnegie would go deeper. He'd say identity determines what kind of effort you're willing to sustain. If your identity is, I'm trying to become successful, your effort will be inconsistent. Because trying allows for stopping. Trying allows for changing your mind. Trying allows for quitting when it gets hard. But if your identity is, I am a builder, your effort becomes automatic. Not because you're more disciplined than other people, but because builders build. That's not what they do when they feel like it. That's who they are. And you can't not be who you are. Here's where Carnegie's teaching becomes almost brutal in its honesty. He believed most people lose their entire lives waiting to be ready, waiting to feel confident, waiting for the right moment, waiting for permission, waiting for validation from someone who has authority to tell them they're allowed to start. And while they're waiting, they're dying. Not physically, but the version of them that could have built something is dying. Because every day you wait is a day you don't build. And days become weeks, weeks become months, months become years. And at some point, you look back and realize you spent your entire life preparing to live instead of actually living. Carnegie valued irreversible decisions above almost everything else. Decisions where you burn the ships, where you eliminate the option to retreat, where you commit so fully that the only path forward is success or death. And that sounds dramatic. It sounds extreme. It sounds reckless to people who value safety. But that's exactly the point. Most people keep escape routes open. They start a business but keep their job just in case. They pursue a dream but maintain a backup plan if it doesn't work out. They commit partially, and partial commitment produces partial results. You can't build an empire with one foot out the door. You can't create something extraordinary while protecting yourself from failure. Carnegie taught total commitment, the kind that terrifies you when you make it, the kind that makes you vulnerable, the kind that forces you to succeed because failure means you lose everything. Not because he was reckless, but because he understood human psychology. When you have a backup plan, you'll use it. When you have an escape route, you'll take it. When you give yourself permission to quit if it gets too hard, it will get too hard and you'll quit. But when you eliminate every option except success, when you make the decision irreversible, when you burn every bridge back to your old life, something changes. You stop hoping it works out. You start making it work out, because you have no other choice. Hill absorbed this teaching. You can see it in Think and Grow Rich when he writes about definiteness of purpose, when he talks about making a decision and refusing to be swayed from it, when he describes successful people as those who make decisions quickly and change them slowly, if at all. But he presented it as a characteristic of successful people. Carnegie lived it as the mechanism that creates success. He didn't observe that successful people make firm decisions. He taught that firm decisions create successful people. The decision comes first. The success comes second, not the other way around. Let me give you a specific example of how Carnegie operated. When he decided to sell his steel company to J.P. Morgan in 1901, he didn't spend months deliberating. He didn't form committees to study the offer. He didn't hire consultants to run projections. He made the decision in one night. Morgan wanted to buy. Carnegie wanted to sell. The only question was price. And Carnegie wrote a number on a piece of paper. $480 million. He handed it to Morgan the next morning. Morgan looked at it and said, I accept. The largest business transaction in history at that point, decided in less than 24 hours. But here's what makes that decision remarkable. Carnegie didn't second-guess it, didn't wonder if he should have asked for more, didn't regret it when the steel market continued growing and he could have made even more money by waiting. He made the decision, executed it, and never looked back. Because looking back is what people who haven't fully committed do. People who've made irreversible decisions don't waste energy on what might have been. They made their choice. They live with it. They move forward. And that single-mindedness, that absolute refusal to entertain doubt after the decision is made, is what allowed Carnegie to make decisions faster than anyone around him. While others were still analyzing, he was already executing. Hill wrote about this in Think and Grow Rich, but he softened it. He made it sound like a personality trait, like something some people naturally have and others don't. Carnegie taught it as a skill, as a practice, as something you develop by making small, irreversible decisions until you build the capacity to make large ones. You don't start by burning your entire life down. You start by making one decision you refuse to reverse, and then another, and another, until irreversibility becomes your default mode of operating, until commitment without escape routes feels normal instead of terrifying. If this kind of teaching doesn't appear in your regular feed, it's because most people aren't ready for it. Most people want motivation that makes them feel good without demanding anything uncomfortable. Subscribe now to stay at this level, because what's coming next is the part that will separate you from 99% of people watching this video. Let me make this practical without giving you a useless checklist. Most people fail not because they lack strategy. They fail because they seek external validation before making internal decisions. They want proof before commitment. They want certainty before risk. They want success before claiming the identity of someone who succeeds. And that's backwards. That's the wrong sequence. That's why they stay stuck. Carnegie taught the opposite sequence. Decide first, commit irreversibly, act from that commitment, and let results follow, not the other way around. Here's what that looks like in real life. You want to build a business. Most people research for 6 months. They study the market. They analyze competitors. They read books about entrepreneurship. They watch videos about starting a business. And then they plan for another 6 months. They create business plans. They design logos. They build websites. They set up social media accounts. And then they test the idea cautiously. They launch a minimum viable product. They keep their job just in case. They tell themselves they're being smart, strategic, responsible. But what they're actually doing is avoiding commitment. They're keeping the escape route open. And that escape route guarantees mediocrity. Carnegie's approach would be completely different. Decide you're a builder, not someday. Not if the business works out. Right now. Today. Make that decision final, and then act from that decision. Quit the job. Eliminate the backup plan. Make success the only option, and then build with the urgency of someone who has no choice. Not because you're reckless, but because you've committed irreversibly and now there's no path except forward. That urgency, that necessity, that absolute requirement to make it work, produces better decisions than comfort ever could. When failure isn't an option, you find ways to succeed that you never would have discovered if you were protecting yourself from risk, or you want to create content. Most people study the algorithm for months. They analyze successful creators. They identify their niche. They plan their content calendar. They design their thumbnails. They write their first 10 scripts. And then they post inconsistently. They publish when they feel inspired. They wait to see if the market responds. They check their analytics obsessively. And when growth is slow, they question whether it's worth it. They wonder if they should try a different strategy. They consider giving up and trying something else because they never committed irreversibly. They're testing, experimenting, exploring, but not building. Carnegie would say, decide you're a creator. Make that decision absolute, and then publish daily for a year. Not because you feel like it, not because the analytics are encouraging, not because people are watching, but because creators create. That's who they are. And once you decide that's who you are, publishing isn't optional. It's not something you do when you're motivated. It's something you do because it's an expression of your identity. And when you publish daily for a year, regardless of results, regardless of feedback, regardless of growth, something happens. You get better. The algorithm starts responding. The audience starts finding you. Not because you got lucky, but because consistency over time builds momentum that inconsistency can never create. Or you want to change your life financially. Most people read books about money. They take courses on investing. They listen to podcasts about wealth building. They consume content about financial freedom. And then they wait to feel ready before they act. They wait until they have more income. They wait until they pay off debt. They wait until the market looks better. They wait until they feel more knowledgeable. And while they're waiting, years pass. And their financial situation doesn't change. Because knowledge without application is just entertainment. Carnegie would say, decide you're wealthy. Not in the future when you have money. Right now, today. Decide that your identity is someone who builds wealth, and then act from that identity. Not by pretending to have money you don't have, but by making decisions from abundance instead of scarcity. By investing instead of consuming. By building instead of hoping. By creating value instead of trading time for money. By becoming the kind of person who generates wealth instead of the kind of person who wishes for it. And when you make that identity shift, when you decide it's final and irreversible, your behavior changes automatically. You stop making poor financial decisions because poor financial decisions are inconsistent with your identity. You start building wealth because building wealth is what wealthy people do. And you are a wealthy person, not because your bank account says so, but because you decided you are. And now you're acting from that decision until reality matches it. And here's the part that creates the most discomfort. When you make internal decisions before external validation, people will criticize you. They'll call you arrogant. They'll say you're delusional. They'll tell you to be realistic. They'll question your credentials. They'll doubt your readiness. They'll remind you of every reason why you're not qualified. And that social pressure is exactly what separates builders from spectators. Spectators need social approval. Builders need internal clarity. Spectators adjust their identity based on what others think. Builders decide their identity and then ignore everyone who disagrees. Carnegie understood this completely. When he decided to dominate the steel industry, he was nobody. He had no proof that he could do what he was claiming he would do. He had no credentials that said he was qualified. He had no validation from experts. He had no endorsement from authority figures. He just had a decision. An internal, irreversible decision that he was going to build the largest steel company in the world. And then he acted from that decision, not waiting for permission, not waiting for encouragement, not waiting for someone to tell him he was ready. He decided he was ready. And then he became ready by doing what ready people do. And people mocked him. They questioned him. They doubted him. They told him he was being unrealistic. They reminded him of his lack of experience. They pointed out all the reasons he would fail, but he didn't adjust his decision based on their opinions. He didn't modify his identity to make them more comfortable. He stayed committed to what he'd decided internally, regardless of what anyone said externally. And eventually, the external world had no choice but to agree with what he'd already decided, not because he convinced them with words, but because his results made disagreement impossible. Let me show you the psychological proof of why this works. Look at the pattern in comments on any video like this. Some people write, "This changed my life. I've been applying this and everything shifted." Others write, "This is just motivation. Nothing practical. Just another feel-good speech that doesn't help anyone." Both people watched the same video. Both heard the same teaching. Both had access to the same information. But only one changed. Why? Because one person made an internal decision and acted from it. The other person consumed content and waited for external circumstances to change. One became a builder, the other remained a spectator. And the difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't opportunity. It wasn't resources. It wasn't even understanding. It was decision. Internal, irreversible decision that didn't wait for proof before committing. The person who changed heard the teaching and thought, "That's who I am now. That's the decision I'm making. That's the identity I'm claiming." And then they acted from that identity until their life reorganized around it. The person who stayed the same heard the teaching and thought, "That sounds good. I should try that. Maybe I'll start working on that. Let me think about how to apply this." And thinking is where they stayed, because thinking without deciding is just mental entertainment. It's consuming content without becoming different. Carnegie trained few people because he knew most couldn't handle the responsibility. And that's the word everyone misses when they study success. Responsibility, not opportunity, not strategy, not secrets, not hacks. Responsibility. The responsibility of deciding who you are before anyone agrees with you. The responsibility of committing when there's no guarantee of success. The responsibility of acting without permission from authority figures. The responsibility of building when everyone around you thinks you're wasting your time. The responsibility of staying the course when nothing is working yet and every external indicator says you should quit. That kind of responsibility crushes most people. Because responsibility means you can't blame anyone else. You can't blame your circumstances. You can't blame your upbringing. You can't blame the economy. You can't blame the market. You can't blame lack of opportunity. You can't blame lack of resources. You can't blame bad luck. You can't blame timing. You decided who you are. You committed to that decision. And now everything that happens is your responsibility to navigate. Not because you caused it, but because you've claimed authorship of your life. And authors don't blame the paper when the story isn't working. They rewrite until it works. Most people reject that level of responsibility. They want the benefits of success without the weight of authorship. They want to build something extraordinary while maintaining the option to say it wasn't their fault if it fails. They want to claim they're builders while keeping the identity of victim available in case they need it. And you can't do both. You can't be both author and victim. You have to choose. Carnegie chose authorship. He claimed total responsibility for everything in his life, and that claim gave him total power to change everything in his life. Because if you're responsible for everything, you can change anything. But if you're a victim of circumstances, you can't change anything. You can only wait for circumstances to change. And circumstances rarely change on their own. The few people who accept that responsibility become unstoppable. Not because they're more talented, not because they have better opportunities, but because they're no longer dependent on external conditions. They're no longer waiting for permission. They're no longer seeking validation. They decided who they are. They committed irreversibly. They claimed total responsibility. And now they're just executing until reality matches their decision. That's the teaching Carnegie gave Hill. And that's the teaching Hill softened because he knew mass audiences would reject it. Hill made it inspirational. Carnegie made it operational. Hill made it feel good. Carnegie made it work. Hill taught millions of people to think about success. Carnegie trained a few people to build success. And both contributions matter, but they're not the same. One gives you philosophy, the other gives you mechanics. One makes you feel motivated, the other makes you accountable. One lets you stay comfortable while feeling productive. The other forces you into discomfort that produces growth. If you feel like you think differently than most people, this channel is your place. Subscribe now, because what I'm about to say next is the question that will determine everything about your future. Let me bring this full circle. Napoleon Hill taught millions. His books have sold over 100 million copies. His principles have created billions of dollars in wealth. His philosophy has changed countless lives. His contribution to humanity is immeasurable, and Carnegie made that possible. Carnegie gave Hill the access, the introductions, the assignment, the framework for thinking about success that Hill spent 20 years refining into the philosophy that became Think and Grow Rich. Without Carnegie, there is no Napoleon Hill. Without Carnegie's willingness to invest in one young journalist with potential but no proof, millions of people never learn the principles that change their lives. But Carnegie chose few. He didn't teach millions. He selected specific individuals and gave them something Hill's books couldn't give: direct access, personal mentorship, the raw, unfiltered version of how empires are actually built. Not the principles, the application, not the philosophy, the execution, not the motivation, the mechanics, not what to think, what to do, and specifically what to do when you don't feel ready, what to do when you don't have proof, what to do when no one believes in you, what to do when circumstances suggest you should quit. You decide who you are anyway. You commit anyway. You act anyway. You take full responsibility anyway, and you stay the course until reality has no choice but to match your decision. And here's the question you need to answer for yourself right now. Do you want to be in the group that learns principles from books? Or do you want to be in the group that applies those principles with the intensity Carnegie demanded? Both are valuable. Both have their place. Both matter. But they produce different results. One produces educated people who understand success. The other produces builders who create success. One gives you knowledge. The other gives you accountability. One makes you feel inspired. The other makes you uncomfortable. One lets you stay where you are while feeling like you're making progress. The other forces you to move or admit you're not serious. There's no judgment in either choice. Most people choose to learn principles, to read books, to consume content, to understand success without building it. And that's fine. That's a valid choice. That's where most people belong. But some people, a very small number of people, choose differently. They choose to build. They choose discomfort. They choose total responsibility. They choose to make irreversible decisions before they have proof. They choose to claim identity before external validation. They choose to become authors of their lives instead of spectators, and those people produce different results. Not because they're smarter, but because they committed differently. Carnegie would look at you right now and ask one question. Have you decided who you are, or are you still trying to become someone? Because if you're still trying to become, you'll spend your entire life becoming and never arriving. You'll always be preparing, always getting ready, always about to start, always one course away, one book away, one strategy away from finally being ready. But ready never comes to people who are trying to become ready. Ready only comes to people who decide they're ready and then act from that decision until it becomes undeniable. But if you decide right now, if you claim the identity without waiting for proof, if you commit irreversibly before anyone agrees with you, then becoming is automatic. You're not trying to be a builder. You are a builder. And builders build. That's not their goal, that's their identity. And identity determines behavior. Always. You don't have to force yourself to do what builders do. You just do it. Because it's who you are, and you can't not be who you are. So here's what I want you to do. Don't just watch this video and move on. Don't add this to your collection of content you consumed but never applied. Don't let this become another motivational speech that made you feel good for 20 minutes and then change nothing. Make a decision right now. Not about what you'll do someday. About who you are today. Right now, in this moment. Are you a builder or a spectator? Are you someone who creates or someone who consumes? Are you someone who decides or someone who waits? Are you someone who takes full responsibility or someone who blames circumstances? Choose right now. Make that choice final. Make it irreversible. Don't give yourself an escape route. Don't keep the option to change your mind if it gets uncomfortable. Decide. And then act from that decision every single day until your external reality has no choice but to match your internal commitment. That's not motivation. That's mechanics. That's how transformation actually works. Decision first, commitment second, action third, results fourth. In that order. Not the other way around. If Andrew Carnegie were alive today, he wouldn't choose followers. He'd choose decisions. He wouldn't ask how many books you've read. He'd ask what you've built. He wouldn't care about your credentials. He'd care about your commitment. He wouldn't be impressed by your knowledge. He'd be impressed by your responsibility. Because knowledge is common. Commitment is rare. And commitment without escape routes, commitment that burns the ships, commitment that accepts total responsibility for everything that follows, that's what creates builders. That's what creates empires. That's what separates the few who change the world from the many who talk about changing the world. If this video confronted you, if it made you uncomfortable, if it challenged something you've been telling yourself, subscribe now and go to the comments right now, not later, right now, and answer one question with brutal honesty. Are you preparing to be, or have you already decided you are? Don't explain. Don't justify. Don't tell your story. Just answer, preparing or decided. That's it. I read every comment. And your answer will reveal everything about where you'll